Welcome to my rose garden. It was about 10 years ago that I planted out this rose garden. It was one of the first areas in my yard that I planted well before I got into fruit trees. My yard is located outside of but close to Phoenix, Arizona. That is USDA Zone 9B. In winter we can get to mid-20s in those severe years, and then as far as the highs, we are quite hot here and get up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So definitely a hot desert climate, similar to Las Vegas, Southern California. And just on a personal note, this rose garden was deeply motivated by my mom, who just absolutely loves roses, so she was very much involved in the roses that I selected and just the sheer number of roses that I have here in the garden. So I will be providing a tour today, and you'll see all 20 of my rose bushes. The majority are hybrid tea. I do have a Floribunda and one Climber that I'll be showing you. If you're interested on more of the care aspects of being able to grow these roses in a hot, dry climate, I'm going to link my earlier videos that I've done on care and maintenance. And just so you understand placement, the majority of the roses that I'm going to show you are south exposure and just off my west facing wall. So they do get a lot of sunlight during the day. Most of them, there are a couple in shade, but just to point out that I have never shaded these roses in the decade or so that I've been growing them, except for last year. We had very high heat last year, many consecutive days above 110, and the roses really felt it this past year and burnt up pretty badly. So you will see some frames, some metal frames out of EMT conduit, and those are just there in case I need to hang some shade cloth. But outside of those severe conditions, roses do quite well here in the summer. They are not going to look their best in the summer. They are really going to look their best outside of summer, in spring, where we are right now, fall as well as winter here in the Phoenix, Arizona area. So with that, let's get started on the tour. We're going to start this rose tour off with a variety called Oklahoma. So Oklahoma was bred in the 1960s. Its parentage is actually with Chrysler Imperial, another one of my favorite red roses. Very dark red, almost turns to a black red in the heat. Very long stems, so great cutting rose. You can see a fairly large rose to this. There's around 40 petals. Nicely formed with that high center, and extremely fragrant. So it has that classic damask rose scent. Really striking rose in the garden. And this is a fairly young bush, so it hasn't gotten too large, but this does favor more of that upright growth. Next door we have another red rose. This was actually introduced in the 1980s, and it was named in honor of the Swedish actress Ingrid Bergman. So you can see on this variety that the roses are quite large, and you can see the color not as dark as the Oklahoma, but definitely that warm velvety dark red. So most people describe this as a cardinal red. Just a really striking bloom, and you can see quite productive. As we come into the bloom, you can see how well formed the flowers are. They have that nice high-centered form. And what I really like about this variety is how hardy it is. So it does quite well in our heat. And I was actually surprised to hear that this is tolerant of the cold as well. It's good all the way down to 4B. And this is also a fairly vigorous bush, but I have to say it likes to really grow more in a bush form. It's not really an upright grower, so I don't have to prune that heavy on this one. So that's Ingrid Bergman. Up next is a South African variety called Giver of Hope. It's a very thick-petaled, whitish rose. You can see beautiful formation on it. There's a light yellow at the center, While there is no fragrance to this rose, you can see that it's very, very prolific with blooms. Stands up to the heat pretty well here. I'm not aware of this variety actually being available in the US. This was one that I purchased from a Ludwig's rose branch that was in Phoenix for a while, but then left several years back. Ludwig's sells roses in Pretoria, South Africa, so I believe this is one they may have introduced. But for a white rose, does pretty well. Very long-lasting blooms. You can see very elegant, long-stemmed. On growth habit, this is going to be more of a bushy type rose. Doesn't really favor that vertical growth rate, so stays fairly compact around shoulder height. And I would say the only challenge with this rose is that the thrips really go after them. So this one will tend to brown a lot if you're not constantly spraying with spinosad to keep those thrips in check. Thrips in general tend to go after the lighter colored roses like this one here. Another nice thing about this bush is that the foliage is thornless. And as you can see, a really nice waxy green, which provides a nice contrast against that white. Here we have another South African variety called the yellow. It too is not fragrant at all, that I can sense anyways. Really purchased this one for the color aspect. It's fairly rare to find a yellow rose that retains its deep yellow coloring as it blooms out. A lot of your yellow varieties will pale and fade, and this one does not. Plus it has a really nice formation to it. Again, that high center, very classic hybrid tea rose form on this one. Also very waxy green, dark green leaves. Thornless. On shaping, just like Giver of Hope, this is very bushy. It tends to really sprawl out, especially with all the blooms. It can kind of weep with just the weight of all the blooms. Good performer in our climate. Again, I don't think that this one is available in the US. This was probably a rose that was introduced by Ludwig's in South Africa. So I have 3 red roses in the yard that are fairly similar to each other, but each have a slightly different fragrance and level during the growing season. So one of those is this rose here, Chrysler Imperial. So just swinging around to the back where we have a good example of an open bloom, you can see that it's quite a large bloom there. There's around 50 petals on average, and the coloring is that dark velvety red. And these blooms can get to a diameter between 4 and 5 inches. So again, a really large rose. I have to say that the fragrance on this is quite intoxicating. It's that really deep damask perfume, but also has a slight citrusy scent as well, so fairly unique. This variety has been around for over 50 years, so been around for quite some time. And it's also won a lot of awards. As you can see, it's quite tall, even though I trim these all around the same height. This one wants to grow very, very tall. So it's an upright grower. You're going to need the space, the vertical space for that to grow. It also grows quite wide. So this is a larger rose variety. Really not too suitable for a container unless you really keep it pruned up. Next door is Firefighter. It's another extremely fragrant, long-stemmed, classic red rose. There are about 40 petals on each rosebud. Has a high-centered form. It can tolerate our intense heat, and just like Chrysler Imperial, it favors that vertical height. So you can see it's almost at the 6-foot height, and it takes a lot of heading back to keep this at shoulder height where I want this bush. Okay, this rose is called Muselucia. It's a South African variety. It's a fairly new variety. I think it was only developed in the last 10 years, and it's new to my garden as well. It's only been here for about 2 years, so fairly young bush. So what really appealed to me was the coloring. You can see that right now this is developed more into a lavender, but it starts out as a light pink, and then it changes as the bloom opens more fully. So really interesting coloring. So it has this light rose scent, but then a deeper fragrance of almost like a fruitiness to it. For a very nice cutting rose, long stemmed, solitary roses. If I could have only one rose, it would be this one here, Mr. Lincoln. So it's not quite as dark as Chrysler Imperial, but the buds begin as a velvety crimson color and then lighten into this striking cherry red. Has a very strong damask rose fragrance that just fills the air. My most fragrant rose in the yard. You do need space again for this one, as it does favor that vertical height. Has really good disease resistance. Can handle our heat. These are quite beautiful and large, 4 to 6 inches, high centered, and fully double. Now we're looking at Chicago Peace. This is a classic rose that's been around for a long time, related to the rose peace. Now I typically get fragrant roses, try to select types that provide that aspect. This particular rose variety is not fragrant at all. Very mild if any, but you can see just a huge rose. Gorgeous coppery pink blooms to it, about 6 inches wide. One of the most amazing roses for coloring. So if you want a burst of color and you don't have a whole lot of space, this is actually a really great variety for that, because this rose does not get very large. This one definitely stays on the smaller side. I really haven't seen it get much bigger than 5 feet tall. But beautiful double cupped rose. This variety is Lasting Love. It is a red rose, but it's more of a red pink coloring on this. Really nice shape again, very fragrant. Can look almost hot pink in the summertime, and then in the cooler time it takes more of the red shading on. So you can see it's definitely more of a shrub type growth habit. It doesn't favor that vertical growth. So it would be a nice one in a walkway and doesn't require all that much pruning. Again, does well in our heat here. Blooms on and off during the full growing season, like many of these rose varieties do. This bush has a tendency to grow both wide and tall, so it's very vigorous in our climate. It is a South African variety. I believe it was introduced by Ludwig's in South Africa. It is the only place that I know of that carries this particular variety. I was lucky again to get this at a local Ludwig's branch when they were in Phoenix. But beautiful silver lilac coloring on the rose. As with many of the varieties that I'm growing, this hybrid tea has really nice form, shape to it. You can see a high pointed center on it. Looks to be about 4 inches wide. And this one blooms on and off pretty much all growing season here. Of course, in the summer, the blooms tend to shrink up in our heat, but this does very well with our heat. Okay, here we have a rosebush variety called Fragrant Cloud. It offers that full package in that you can see quite a striking color on this. It has this unique coral orange coloration to the bloom, very large bloom, 5 to 6 inches in diameter, and incredibly fragrant. Not as much that damask, rose scent from a Mr. Lincoln or a red type, but incredible fragrance for a non-red variety. It's a very upright grower, so you can see it's pretty tall. I do have to head this back. And really nice contrast with this dark green foliage. So while fragrance was definitely something that I was looking for in a lot of these varieties I selected, color was another one. And this bush here, Monica, was one that I selected specifically for the coloring. So this rose doesn't have that deep fragrance that we've seen on other roses, but does have just a striking color to it. It has this deep copper red bloom. Now this does get quite a bit of shade. I think if it had a little bit more sunlight, it would get a little bit bigger. I'm constantly having to trim down this key lime that's next to it so that it gets light, but one can get quite tall if it has adequate sunlight. Otherwise it'll stay around 4 to 5 feet. The last rose on this side is JFK. Classic rose that's been around for a long time. I think it was introduced in the 60s by Jackson Perkins. It really embodies that classic, elegant hybrid tea rose shape. Especially in cooler times when the bud first emerges, it can almost have a green tint to the white, and then as it opens up, it blooms into this pure white color. Fairly large bloom on this one. I think around 5 inches across. Nice long stems. And this one I think you could actually get away with growing in a container. It tends to stay fairly small. Really doesn't get any bigger than 5 feet. Especially this one here that's in the shade of this white sapote. It's tending to stay more on the small side. Again, like I mentioned with the other white rose I'm growing, thrips do tend to go after the white roses a lot more. So you will, on occasion, get this browning here on the petals. On fragrance level, this does not have that intense damask rose fragrance like a Mr. Lincoln or a Chrysler Imperial, but for a white rose, this is quite fragrant. So it delivers on that account as well. This rose is Spice Coffee. It is one of my favorites. So during this time of the year, you can see that the rose coloration is beige color, and then at the center, a golden color emerges. And in cooler times, so fall and winter, this rose will actually bloom a lavender shade. So very different coloration depending on the season. You can see it's quite prolific with blooms. And the scent on this rose, citrusy fragrance. So a little bit different than a classic rose scent. I'm not sure what the growth habit is supposed to be on this variety, but for me, it stays fairly short and bushy. It doesn't really want to be all that upright. And because the blooms are so large, you can see that it tends to have a weeping format to it, just due to the weight of these blooms. Here we have Perfume Delight. It is a very fragrant rose. And what I love about this variety is it has such a deep pink coloration on it. Kind of that rose pink color. And huge blooms. So on average there's going to be more than 30 petals on this, around 5 inches wide, and fully double. It makes for a really good cutting rose just because the roses you can see are borne on very long stems. This is a variety that favors that upright growing structure, so this can be a tall rose and does need to be headed back on a regular basis just to keep it around shoulder height. This variety here is good as gold. Mainly purchased it for the coloring. So it has that mix of orange and yellow to the bloom. And you can see as the bloom fully opens, it develops a pinkish tinge around the edge. Not sure about the growth stature, but at least this bush stays fairly small here for me. It does not favor upright growth. And carries with it a very mild scent. So this is my one Mini-Flora. It has a classic hybrid T shape to the rose. This is normally encrusted with blooms. In fact, it went through a really large blooming cycle. So it's a little bit ahead of the others, and so it's in a lull right now. So I can't show you it in its prime. But you can see that the coloring on this is almost like a fuchsia blend. It's an easy to grow rose, definitely very productive. Being that it's a Mini-Flora, it's going to maintain more of a shrub layer naturally, so you don't need to prune as much. And when the bloom's fully open, they're about 2.5 inches across. Here's a second bush of Ingrid Bergman. You can see just as prolific as the one I showed you at the beginning of the tour. This variety is called People's Princess. It's named after Diana, the Princess of Wales, who was much loved by her people. It is a South African variety. It's one that I got again at a Ludwig's branch. I don't believe you can get this in the US. It's medium scented rose, so quite a bit of fragrance in it. And as far as shaping, I find it to be one of the most exquisite shaped roses in the garden. Just has beautiful high pointed flowers. And you can see that the pink is almost this luminous pink satin color and kind of fades as the bloom opens towards those outer edges. This is a great performer in our climate, always full of blooms. And on growth habit, it's vigorous, but it's not, one of those very aggressive vertical growers. It tends to stay shoulder height in bush form. Definitely one of my favorite roses in the garden. The last rose to show you is not with the others. This is out on the opposite side of the yard, and it is a climbing rose called Don Juan. The intent with this rose is to have it grow on this arched metal trellis that you can see, providing a focal point to this path near the east side of my backyard. So a little bit about this variety. You can see it's not in bloom right now. Just missed the blooming cycle on this one, but there are a number of buds that have formed and will be out in bloom in a few weeks here. The reason I picked this variety is it is an extremely fragrant red climbing rose. It's said to do very well in a hot climate. People that grow it out in the Phoenix area have said that it has performed very well for them. The blooms are quite large, around 4 inches, and very fragrant. Has this fruity rose fragrance. So not a whole lot to show you at this point. This rosebush has a lot more growing to do. It's only been in the ground for about 8 months, but should be pretty fast grower and put on some decent height this year.